I got 99 problems, but the science ain't one.
Welcome to the Our Hen House interview. I'm so excited. This is Mariann Sullivan, and I'm welcoming back. And I just figured out it was in 2018 that we last spoke to Bruce Friedrich, and here he is again. And he's the founder, president of the Good Food Institute, of course. You probably know him as that. And he's also the author of the very recently released Meat: How the Next Agricultural Revolution Will Transform Humanity's Favorite Food and Our Future. I would have said it was sugar, but, I would say meat is way up there. He's actually a complete pioneer in attempting to change the way the world eats. He has accomplished a lot since we last talked to him. And so I'm super excited. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks so much, Mariann. I'm super excited to be here.
Before we get to that, just a quick reminder about the Our Hen House podcast: Rising Anxieties on Tuesdays, the Hen Report on Thursdays, the long form interview, which is this on Fridays. Bonus for Flock members comes out on Mondays. And we're a podcast and we're on YouTube. So please subscribe and hit like wherever you listen. And even if you don't listen, subscribe and hit like. So Bruce, before we get to the book, I imagine most people who are listening kind of know a bit about the Good Food Institute, but can you just tell people who haven't heard of it, or have heard, or like me, have heard a little about it, but are not nearly as up to date as they should be on all the things that you're doing and the kind of scope and breadth of the work, so we know where we're starting from?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mariann. I'm such a fan of the podcast and really delighted and honored to be on. So the Good Food Institute, we are a nonprofit organization. We're basically a nonprofit science think tank. We have a little north of 240 full-time team members. They're spread across 6 organizations. So there's the Good Food Institute in the US, and then GFI India, Israel, Brazil, Asia Pacific, and Europe. It's really focused on the science of making meat from plants, and cultivated meat, growing actual animal meat directly from small samplings of animal muscle or animal fat. And yeah, I mean, that's basically it. We're a science think tank that produces science, does a lot of scientific analysis, and works with governments to understand the value of plant-based meat and cultivated meat to things like economic growth and food security, and then working with other NGOs around the world to understand the value of alternative meats to things like hunger alleviation, the range of environmental benefits, antimicrobial resistance, pandemic risk prevention, and those sorts of things.
So one thing I think people might not realize, because I guess I sort of realized it, but how totally future oriented you are. I mean, I think you say that you don't consider your mission to convince people to be eating plant-based meat right now. That's not really who you are. There are other organizations doing that. Is that correct? Like, have I stated that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do a little bit of that. We're enthusiastic about the early adopters, but the plurality of our team members around the world are scientists. And our number one goal is a maximally robust scientific ecosystem focused on the scientific and engineering challenges of plant-based and cultivated meat. And so the way we think you get there is you convince governments to put billions of dollars into helping us solve the scientific and engineering challenges. So our global battle cry is that governments should be funding this work.
Yeah.
So when we were looking at the areas of the world to operate in, we only had 2 questions that we asked. The first one was, does this government fund a lot of science for reasons that alternative meats solve? And the second was, do they have world-class scientific institutions? So if you read our annual reports or anything that tells you, why we're in a specific country, it won't say anything about the number of consumers there. It will talk about the scientific ecosystem and the pitch to the governments that they should be funding this science. So, I mean, Singapore and Israel are tiny countries, so we would not be there if they didn't have a huge food security reason to be funding the science and engineering of plant-based and cultivated meat, and world-class scientific institutions. So it's not at all, but it's definitely not one of our primary focuses.
Yeah, and I really want to get into those issues, especially the food security issues, which I think people listening may not be as aware of some of the other reasons to adopt a plant-based diet. There are so many. You can really pick and choose. And the food security issues are, I think, are one of the ones I'm the most naive about. I just want to say also in setting the tone kind of that I really like your optimistic assessment of recent setbacks because I'm sick of reading articles in the Atlantic about how plant-based is dead. There are no more vegans. It's all over. Like and I have everyone listening knows, or if you've listened regularly, I always say, back in the aughts, uh, there were a lot of companies going into the internet, and they all failed except for one, and that was Amazon. And from what we hear, they're doing well. So you got to take a long term look. But I'm in a very weak position to be making that argument. Can you just give us a little bit of your spiel as to why it's way too early to despair, even though there have, of course, been setbacks?
Yeah. I mean, if you look back 10 years ago right now, there was literally no Impossible Burger. There was no Beyond Burger. None of the plant-based products were anywhere near satisfying meat eaters. Veggie burgers were really veggie first, and burger kind of not at all. Nuggets were even further away from anything that looks like taste parity. On the cultivated meat side, 10 years ago right now, in the history of the entire world, $3 million had been raised by one company. No other company had raised a dime. Now we're 10 years along, and we have a long way to go, but we've made a lot of progress. 10 years ago, there had been one scientific conference for cultivated meat and 0 scientific conferences for plant-based meat. Now there are literally dozens all over the world every single year. 10 years ago, there had been 4 scientific papers on cultivated meat ever published in history. Now there are about 170 per year. 6 years ago, no government other than Israel and Singapore had funded or started a regulatory process to approve cultivated meat. Now more than 20 governments, all of the governments where GFI operates, are doing significant funding and consider this to be one of their food security priorities. 10 years ago, there had been, I think, 7 patents, something like that. Through the end of 2017, I think there were 7 patents in cultivated meat. Now there are 1,500 patents. Until 2023, there was a total of 1 third-party sort of verification of what it is that we're talking about alternative proteins and their value for the range of environmental and global health and hunger and malnutrition as an intervention. Now we've got the World Bank, the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, a couple of reports from McKinsey, Nobel laureate in economics and his commission at the University of Chicago, the UN Environment Program, and all of that's in the last 3 years, those third-party verifications that I just mentioned. So it just, as you pointed out, it's not an indictment of a technology to say that the private sector portion of the technology is struggling. So you have your example from circa the year 2000, where the NASDAQ lost 80% of its value because internet commerce stocks, the dot-com bust, more than half of those companies went out of business. Amazon stock fell from over $215 a share to less than $6. So it fell by more than 97%. Pets.com obviously went out of business. It was sort of the poster child for whoever thought internet commerce could work. And people were ruthless. And now Chewy is worth more than 30 times as much as Pets.com was ever worth. Or you flash back 100 years before that. In the first 10 years of automobile innovation, more than 500 companies went out of business. The president of Princeton University at the time was Woodrow Wilson in 1906. He said that automobiles will never be more than a plaything for the idle rich. And in both cases, the reason that the commentaries were so disparaging, for automobiles, they were really hard to start. You had to be very strong. They were breaking down constantly, which meant you had to be very mechanically inclined, and they were really expensive. And people just couldn't imagine that Henry Ford would come along in 1908, solve those 3 problems, and 20 years later, the automobile industry would be the largest industry in America. Or with dot-coms. Most people were still plugging into landlines. People were not yet familiar with the idea of ordering things online. Jeff Bezos hadn't sort of revolutionized what it looks like to be insanely customer focused and to grow and slash prices, et cetera. And so people just have this idea still. You look at the articles that have been unkind about plant-based meat. If you actually read them closely, none of them are talking to scientists. All of them boil down to the products don't yet taste good enough and they cost too much. Like that is literally the underlying message of all of them. And so that really is like saying about automobiles in 1900, well, they're really hard to start and they keep breaking down and they're too expensive. Or with internet commerce in 2000, gosh, this is never going to catch on because right now it hasn't caught on already. That's just really the nature of innovation. And on the science side and the government support side, we really have made tremendous progress. And that's not to say it's going to succeed, but it is to say that, and what I try to do with the book is to basically dispute both the undue pessimism and also the undue optimism. So what I think is true is that the science and engineering can work. What I also think is true is that it's going to be expensive and hard. But what I focus on in chapters 9 and 10 is the massive self-interested economic and food security incentives of governments, because this is right in line with stuff that they already prioritize and are spending on. So really, I mean, even if you just look at pandemic risk, the amount of money that's going to cost to shift in this direction is the tiniest fraction of the amount of money the global economy lost on COVID-19. And COVID-19 was not that, it wasn't that transmissible. It wasn't that deadly. It really, I mean, it sent more than 100 million people into dire poverty who wouldn't have been there otherwise. But it was like way later than most of the experts predicted in the developing world. It could have been so much worse.
Oh, and we got the vaccine like instantly, which, really changed the trajectory.
Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein tell the story of the mRNA vaccine. It is fascinating from the perspective of a scientific innovation that nobody thought was possible, that nobody would fund. The woman who was responsible for that, sort of pioneering work had basically been relegated to like PA status or something, and she just couldn't get any funding to do the work. And it ended up being, I think, if my memory serves, like some startup or something. I think Moderna just sort of picked it off a shelf and decided, yeah, we'll try this. There are just so many stories like that. Penicillin's another really good example. Didn't sit on a shelf, but like couldn't get funding for 13 years.
Yeah, I didn't know that penicillin story. That was fascinating. I kind of thought they invented it. They just, they were like, yay. And then they cured everybody. I had no idea, like it sat around for that long. So it makes the point that there are a lot of elements that go into this. So of course, things are not automatically going to happen. But there is also that, I guess it's sort of like a tipping point kind of thing that once it starts and it works, it can happen very fast.
Oh yeah, shockingly fast. I mean,
think of phones.
Yeah. I mean, we went from 25 years ago or 26 years ago, every phone plugged into a wall. And now like very close to 100%, if not 100%.
Yeah.
Very, very, very recently.
Do you ever read novels from like a while ago and think, well, why didn't they just call? And then you're like, oh, right. They didn't have a telephone.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, there are just many examples. Penicillin's another example. Like once the Department of Defense in the U.S. Decided it was going to solve the final tech challenges that nobody else would fund and scale it up, boom. Automobiles are another. Yeah, just so many examples. Once you work out the kinks, really can just shoot up the S-curve. And that's I think, certainly my expectation. I argue in the book that once you get to price and taste parity for cultivated meat in particular, we'll shoot up the S-curve.
So we did mention that we're going to go into food insecurity, which is one of those issues that, I don't want to talk about problems the whole time because I think most of our listeners know most of the problems. But food insecurity is a really interesting topic in the sense, not only because, we all kind of know that food insecurity is an issue, but how bad is it? How bad is it likely to become? How will alternative proteins change that? And is this governments are really something? I would think that governments would worry about this a lot. Our government doesn't seem to be terribly concerned at the moment, but feeding people, that's bottom line for a successful government or a survivable government.
Yeah, and I should clarify that food security is sort of an umbrella term, and it means a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. So you will hear people refer to food security and what they're talking about is hunger and malnutrition. And true, that is a food security issue. That's not the one, that's not the one that governments are like super worried about. The one that governments are super, unless you're like, India or a country that's actually suffering from hunger and malnutrition. But the reason that Singapore, Israel, Korea, Japan, China, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, when you talk about food security with those governments, it's really food self-sufficiency. And all of those governments are agriculture poor, basically, which means they're importing a lot of their food. And, look at what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz right now and fertilizer prices skyrocketing. Look at what happened at the beginning of the Ukraine war and front page news all over the world. The idea that Ukraine's 50 million metric tons of grain were going to be disrupted by that war. Well, then think about the fact that we feed 1.4 billion metric tons of grain to chickens and farmed fish and other farm animals. So if you are importing as much food as Korea, Japan, and the other countries that I just named are importing, that is an incredibly precarious place to be. China is not as food insecure from a percentage basis as some of the countries that I just named. But if you flash back to when China joined the WTO, they were a net food exporter, and they have been going backward every single year since. And it's really because they solved their hunger and malnutrition problem by increasing incomes and GDP. But what that means is that people are eating more and more meat. So if you read circa 2000 commentaries, Lester Brown thought. So Lester Brown was saying, he got ridiculed for it, really, for saying when China joins the WTO, watch their food imports skyrocket. They are going to be a net food importer. And people were pretty negative to him about that. And it's happened every single year. They're now the world's largest importer of every kind of meat. Far and away, Brazil's largest recipient of soy. All of that soy is fed to chickens and pigs and farmed fish. And it just keeps going up. So this is one of the reasons that China is leaning in on alternative proteins. And this is really our pitch to China and kind of governments around the world. And then if you're talking about some place that is already a massive agricultural producer, like the United States or Brazil, then when you're talking about food security, you're talking about food systems resilience and the fact that the thing that makes meat problematic from an environmental standpoint also makes it a colossal opportunity from a profit standpoint, and also from a food systems resilience and food system fragility.
I love that messaging. That just makes so much sense. Everything that's wrong with it is an opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And none of the corporations and the governments recognize that if you have to grow massive amounts of crops and ship them to a feed mill and operate a feed mill and ship the feed to the farm and operate the farm and ship the animals to the slaughterhouse and operate the slaughterhouse, like all those extra stages of production are an inefficiency that is extraordinarily fragile. Look at the fertilizer going through the Strait of Hormuz. Suddenly the crops that feed the chickens and the pigs and the farmed fish and everything, they've got this new input that's costing 3 times as much, et cetera. And it's just an incredible precarity, incredible fragility. And if you can condense that, which plant-based meat and cultivated meat do, you can improve your food system's resilience, which is really, pretty much better for everybody.
Yeah, well, if we would only do what's good for everybody, the world would be a different place. But I have about a million different questions on that, but I actually want to move on because we only have so much time, and maybe I can get back to some of that. But I want to talk about the product itself because I think probably our listeners are probably pretty interested in the product itself. One thing I know you talked about was micronutrients. I like to pretend that meat doesn't have any micronutrients, but that's not actually true. And the meat industry, on the other hand, likes to pretend that meat is absolutely necessary for human health, and that's obviously not true. But there are nutrients. It does have nutrients other than calories, and it does. How are we going to get serious about replacing it and dealing with the fact that people are currently relying on meat to provide things that they don't have to rely on meat for, but they are?
Yeah, let me just say one last thing on food security.
Sure.
That is that my first choice to write the foreword of the book is a woman named Caitlin Welsh. She was at the Department of State for about 5 years under President Obama. She was at the National Security Council for almost all of President Trump's first term. Now she runs the Food and Water Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which in a pre-Trump era would have been considered center-right. Now it's pretty middle of the road. And she led a report from CSIS that was focused on alternative proteins and food security from the perspective that I was talking about the economic benefits, food systems resilience, and food self-sufficiency. She also, since it was written for U.S. policymakers, talked about competition with China, and she talked about the vulnerability to agro-terrorism. You have all those extra steps and all those extra stages. It's that much vulnerability, extra vulnerability to agro-terrorism. And she very graciously wrote the foreword to the book, which I think sort of underlines the seriousness of this as something that governments need to pay attention to. And all of that way of thinking about food security, that's chapter 10 of the book. Chapter 9 of the book is the economic benefits. Chapter 8 of the book is the stuff that we were talking about. So I talk about automobiles, I talk about internet commerce and I talk about penicillin, other examples, et cetera. In terms of micronutrients, I mean, cultivated meat is the exact same product. But one of the things I talk about in the book is the meat industry right now. There are literally 100 different drugs that the USDA and the FDA think it is okay to be in meat as long as the levels are sufficiently low. And that includes things like ractopamine and ivermectin and amoxicillin and penicillin and all kinds of other things. If you're talking about fish, almost all human exposure to mercury, this is surprising to people because you hear about mercury being toxic, and you hear about people eating too much fish and they get brain fog. But what people don't realize is this is pretty much the only way human beings ingest mercury is in fish, and it is extraordinarily toxic. And I talk about things like birth defects from fish consumption, cognitive decline from fish consumption, and EPA, government statistics talking about these kinds of things. So cultivated meat is basically all the same micronutrients, all the same macronutrients, but none of the ractopamine and mercury and dioxins and other nasty stuff at also a fraction of the bacterial contamination. Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think we need to. In the book, chapter 1 is about hunger and malnutrition, and I have traditionally thought, and I actually adopted a vegan diet almost 40 years ago now, after I read Diet for a Small Planet. And for me, it was really a response to hunger and malnutrition. It was a response to the fact that if 80% of agricultural land is either growing crops to feed them to animals or grazing ruminants, that causes the price of agricultural land to go up, it causes the price of crops to go up, and it literally leads to hunger and malnutrition. And that argument is about 75% of chapter 1. But through writing the book and interviewing people like Sarah LaHaye at Gain, and the people at the 1 Acre Fund and others, and the people on the Michael Kremer's Commission at the University of Chicago, it did become clear to me that alternative proteins can be a significantly less expensive way of getting high quality protein to people who need it. But that is an area where micronutrients really do matter a lot. Like you and I don't need to worry about micronutrients as vegans because we're eating a varied diet.
Yes, we do eat the vegetables, eat the whole grains. Yeah, but people who are going to give up meat and just start eating plant-based meat instead, they're not going to be necessarily focusing on broccoli.
Most people in developed economies are going to be okay.
Yes, I agree. But they might be concerned.
Well, and then if they're concerned, I mean, it really is. Eat a varied, I mean, I guess two things. One is in developed economies, eat a varied diet. And yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing is eat a varied diet. And I guess, think about the heart disease and the cancer and the other things that come with
Right.
the lack of fiber and the excess saturated fat, cholesterol, et cetera. Like the macronutrients are the really important thing in developed economies. And the macronutrient benefits of plant-based meat are really just
Right.
quite significant. I mean, I don't think people need to be eating a lot more protein than they are. But for people who are concerned about protein, all of the plant-based meats, there are 14 of them that do particularly well in comparison to the animal-based meat they're replacing. All of them have higher protein content with equal bioavailability to what it is that they're replacing.
I talked about this on Rising Anxiety this week, but have you seen this ad from some dairy? They're doing this big ad campaign, and it's comparing 8 grams of protein in dairy milk to 1 gram of protein in the most popular non-dairy milk. And it's just a big sign that says those two things, not mentioning that all of the other non-dairy milks have loads of protein. They're talking about almond milk, of course.
Yeah, I mean, almond milk and oat milk are really sort of flavored water. And so I do think if people are concerned about protein, almond milk and oat milk or rice milk are pretty bad alternatives. Yeah,
try soy.
Soy is a great alternative, but I don't know. We don't need to be concerned about protein, but I don't think that's if we're in developed economies, I just don't think that's a battle we're going to win. And sort of, going all the way back to Atkins, people have been arguing about this. I think pointing out that cultivated meat is the exact same thing, and plant-based meat has even more protein that's equally bioavailable if it's mycoprotein or soy protein. And then on micronutrients, yeah, I mean, if everybody should be, making sure that your micronutrient levels are good. And if they're not, you should take a supplement or change your eating. But eating more of a product that has no fiber, no complex carbohydrates, lots of fat and saturated fat doesn't feel like it's probably the best option.
So can we talk a little bit, when we're talking about the product for a while, not just about the policy, can we talk about the inputs? I have heard of a company that's making food from air. I'm sure you're familiar with them. I think they're Finnish, which is, sounds right. Kind of thing the Finnish would do.
I think that's Solein, but it's the Finnish one. But there are a bunch of them. Yeah, I mean, they're doing precision fermentation.
But mostly, most of the companies are making food from other things, from other food. There are inputs other than air. So can you talk a little bit about what are the most preferable, what are the most scalable? It really struck me that that's hugely important. Let's stop fooling around with beans nobody's ever heard of, and why, and the media, of course. What do the media currently consist of? Are they vegan? The big vegan question, even though most vegans don't really want to eat cultivated meat. If they aren't, are they going to be? I mean, some vegans do want to eat cultivated meat. I shouldn't it's a personal choice.
Yeah, I mean, I other than cultivated meat, which I started eating just shy of 10 years ago, and still eat very infrequently, but I do eat it whenever it's on offer.
Right, of course, which is not often, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Upside Foods, which is the first of the cultivated meat companies, founded by a Mayo Clinic trained cardiologist named Uma Valetti.
Who has been on the podcast. I don't have the episode, but great interview.
So he threw a book party for me a little less than a week ago at Upside Foods, and everybody had their fill of cultivated meat. It was really, I mean, that's actually another example of how much progress we've made. So I had cultivated meat for the first time in October of 2016, and Uma Valetti flew across the country from California to New York City, and he cooked up some cultivated meat for Susie Welch and me. It's his first time meeting her and also meeting Jack Welch. Had this great photo of him with the frying pan, and he's cooking up this cultivated meat. I swear to God, Susie and I split one chicken nugget, less than 10 years ago, because it was just so expensive. So flash forward to 2024 and TED Countdown. So that's TED's annual climate conference. 200 people. It's an invite only thing. And all 200 of them had cultivated meat entrees from Upside Foods. And I talk about this in the book. And one of the things that just really blew my mind is they ran out of the mushroom appetizer and they subbed in cultivated chicken for the mushroom appetizer. So in 8 years, a company that has raised a total of about $600 million went from barely able to spare half a nugget to serving 200 people at a TED conference. And that was not anomalous in terms of the amount of cultivated meat they're making. Another company, the two fathers of cultivated meat, one of them is Uma Valetti, who's a medical doctor. The other one is Mark Post. He's a dual.
Also just the loveliest man.
He is the loveliest man, it's true. He's a dual PhD in tissue engineering and a medical doctor. He was a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And his company, in just a little over a decade, has brought down the price of cultivated meat by a factor of 100,000, by 99.999%. And I think they've raised maybe like $150 million or something like that. That is really, really remarkable progress in a short period of time with not that much investment. So I feel like that's another reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we get back to the media?
Yes.
Because that's always been, a huge concern of vegans.
Yeah. I mean,
And I know it was always said that we can't possibly afford to keep using animal inputs. But so where are we on that?
yes, we cannot possibly afford to keep using animal inputs, and everybody has stopped. So it's called xeno-free media. And I believe all of the companies are now using xeno-free media. So for the longest time, FBS, fetal bovine serum, is what has been used in labs. It's extraordinarily good at causing tissue to grow quickly. So it was sort of the
As
crutch.
it would be.
Yeah. And it's, but it's also insanely expensive. So figuring out a replacement, like it was never going to be the case that cultivated meat was going to be able to use FBS and ever get to commercialization. And so like multiple papers and multiple analyses basically argued this can never work because the current media is way too expensive. It's like just a remarkable lack of scientific rigor to that observation. There was a very scientifically rigorous paper that was done that caused a lot of people to be dubious about the prospects for cultivated meat. A guy named Dave Humber did it. And I think what he said is cultivated meat, it's just not going to be possible to get to below $6.50 per, I can't remember what the, per whatever, liter. Yeah. He said it's not going to be possible. He doesn't think, he doesn't think, he did an analysis. It's not going to be possible to get to below $6.50 per liter. It's already below 25 cents per liter with some companies. So, I mean, it's just another example of people unable to look at the way that something is done now and realize that innovation can change the way that it's done and allow prices to come way down. But I don't think any of the companies are still using media that has animal ingredients. And the animal ingredients are just way more expensive than the non-animal ingredients. So there's a huge incentive to get away from that. And I believe all of the companies have gotten away from that.
What about the machinery? You talk about this a lot as well. The cultivators. Where are we? This sounds like work really does need to be done. Where are we, and what do we need?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an area where I hope AI will be able to get us past having to do analog, trial, error, because that's going to be a really expensive way to figure out how to scale up bioreactor design and figure out what's going to be the best way to produce cultivated meat. I will say the early successes with design of the cultivators, the bioreactors, it looks like a brewery. If you go into a cultivated meat plant, it basically looks like a beer brewery, and they're bioreactors, which is basically fermenters, cultivators. And there are multiple companies now producing in 20,000 liter cultivators, which is a really good sign, because the early expectation and analysis was getting from 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 to 200,000 to bigger than that was going to take a really long time and be insanely expensive. One of the things everybody assumed was that the least expensive way to get there was going to be to basically take bioreactors that were used for pharma and retrofit them. So buy basically used bioreactors and retrofit them. And what turned out to be true is that an awful lot that's required for bioreactors for biopharma, a lot of what's expensive is the sort of bells and whistles that are absolutely necessary for the sorts of needs that biopharma has, but not at all necessary if what you're growing is tissue that doesn't need to stay alive. So the company Vow in Australia has slashed costs requisitioning their own bioreactors. And that's also what Mark Post is doing. It's what Uma Valetti is doing at Upside Foods. So lots of reason to be optimistic. but still massive capex costs.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons that we need governments to help fund the scale up, the same sorts of things that they do with their biopharma industries, that some governments have done with their renewable energy and EV industries. The same thing all governments do with their agriculture industries. Those same sorts of programs and incentives need to apply here.
Given our inability to talk about agriculture sanely in any way whatsoever, it really is unbelievable. And the power of the animal ag industry, which is also very great, and the current status of our government, which is at best, let's just say, confusing. So, what's going to happen in the U.S.? You've expressed concerns that we're missing the boat.
Yeah, I mean, there are reasons for optimism and there are reasons for pessimism. I think the main thing is there's a reason to continue to make sure that everybody in government recognizes from their own vantage point why it's so important that the United States lean in on this. I will say that Republicans and Democrats, there are a lot of champions of plant-based and cultivated meat. Donald Trump in his first term, so up until 2019, the last significant funding for plant-based meat and cultivated meat before 2019 was in 2005. It was maybe $7 million or something like that from the Dutch government. It was the work that Mark Post was doing. And then the next significant government funding was the Trump administration, the National Science Foundation, $3.55 million for a cultivated meat modeling consortium at UC Davis, focused on the primary challenges that exist for cultivated meat scaling. It's also true that it was Trump's FDA and Trump's USDA that got together and said, we don't need to promulgate any new regulations. The current regulatory regime is fine. And I will just say as an aside, that would not have happened if the conventional meat industry were adversarial toward cultivated meat. They're not adversarial toward cultivated meat. They have cultivated meat members. And then the Biden administration, there were 2 approvals of cultivated meat in 4 years. And I think there were 4 approvals in the first 90 days of the Trump administration. And it's not because anybody in the Trump administration is like super excited about plant-based or cultivated meat, but it is because the regulatory regime was a lot more sympathetic to innovation and is a lot more sympathetic to innovation, and also because they are also not adversarial. So Republicans tend to be less excited about spending money on science, period. And that's going to be true here too. But there are a lot of Republicans generally, just like Democrats, are very pro-science. So we do have a lot of allies. And the main work that needs to be done is with the executive agencies. And the scientists in executive agencies tend to be not political appointees. So we can make a lot of progress under any administration. And then we're also looking at things, states that are very innovation and science friendly. Illinois, Massachusetts, California, North Carolina, some other states as well. So there is a room to make a lot of progress. The main thing is we need to frame it in terms of economic benefits, in terms of food security benefits, and then in terms of we like to say friendly competition with China. But the question, do you want China to dominate the global meat supply, is something that causes politicians or ears to perk up, whether they're Republican or they're Democrat.
So is there this kind of mixed incentives? We were talking before about the U.S. being an exporter. That has got to create incentives for not wanting to rock the boat, so to speak, not wanting to change the way meat is produced because we're producing a lot of it. But at the same time, is it mostly the competition from abroad that it's so hard to imagine them thinking this logically, but that at some point our product, which we're producing more of and which is very valuable at the moment, is just going to lose its value because other people are going to be producing the same thing in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S., it's certainly the case that enthusiasm for electric vehicles and solar and wind energy is not bipartisan. There are some Republican champions, but everybody agrees, because it's true, that the U.S. did the early pioneering work, and China has all the production. So both generations of electric vehicle batteries, the sort of first generation EV1, as well as the generation that's used now, that was DOE. That was government funding for open access science. And now China is, I don't know what their percentage is, but Probably like 80% of EV battery production happens in China. The solar story is very, very similar. Right now, the U.S. has, I think, like the top 2 cultivated seafood companies. I believe that's right. Certainly multiple of the top cultivated land animal meat companies, or a couple others in Europe and Israel. So it really, and the most advanced science is also here. So it's really ours to lose. That was true for EV battery production. It was true for solar and wind. And we lost development of those technologies. And you look at something, you look back 25 years, and China's total revenue from solar production and EV production combined 25 years ago was zero. Now it's, I think, north of $1 trillion. If it hasn't hit $1 trillion, it's pretty close in 26 years. This is a $2 trillion industry, and it's really America's to lose. So I think there is, that sort of conversation can really be quite bipartisan.
No, I had no idea that when you started GFI, you actually weren't on board with cultivated meat. Like, can you tell us a little bit about that evolution? And also, what about fermented foods? All right, now I'm asking you 3 questions at once. So just tell us about your evolution on cultivated meat and how you came to, I don't know whether you think it's the equivalent of the plant-based project or actually the primary project.
The point I try to make in the book is we were so wrong about what we thought the plant-based meat endeavor was going to require. And I continue to think it's probably true that the scientific challenges and the scaling challenges around plant-based meat may be easier, but they're also a lot harder for people to understand. With plant-based meat, people are kind of starting at -100 in their understanding. They think they know what the challenge is, and they don't. And even, having conversations with people where one is very, very clear, they still just have preconceived notions and can't really have the conversation and think outside the boxes that they're in. And so that means even though the scientific challenges are probably easier and the scaling challenges are probably easier, you're not going to solve a problem that you're not trying to solve. And in the book, I dive into a lot of ways that the cultivated meat endeavor is much further along than the plant-based meat endeavor, which is also, I think, counterintuitive to a lot of people. And I could talk for the rest of our interview about that topic. So I'll just stop there.
No, actually, give me a little bit more about what this challenge is with the plant-based meat. Is it the taste? Because you talk a lot about that they're just not there yet on the taste. And I taste them, and they taste really good to me, like really good. So, but I'm probably not the target. But is it the perceptions about the taste? Is it the taste itself? Or is it something else completely? That is the block that you're worried is going to take really a lot of effort to get rid of.
I mean, the really big block is getting the scientific focus on it in an open source, open access way. So getting academics who have the relevant skill set to do the work that will allow a company other than Impossible to do a really good job of producing the products. Because if all you've got is essentially one company who's really good at something, that's not a sufficiently large market sector to create the kind of competition and innovation and scale up that's going to be necessary. So on the cultivated meat side, there are now scientists all over the world trying to solve the precise challenge that we have laid out. Thousands of scientists with government funding solving these precise challenges. It's also true that however many tissue engineers there are on the planet, that is the number of people who have the precise right skill set to understand what we're trying to do with cultivated meat. There is no other reason other than making plant-based meat to try to figure out how plant proteins can behave like animal proteins, how plant fats can behave like animal fats, how we can replicate the umami flavor of meat. And we just need a lot more scientists, a lot more work. In the private sector, what this means, well, one other observation that I think does stem out of that, I think it stems out of the misunderstanding primarily, is we don't have much of a B2B infrastructure on the plant-based meat side, which means every single company needs to be an R&D company, an engineering company, and a consumer goods company. All 3 of those are really hard. I have a section in the book that says I got 99 problems, but the science ain't one. The science seems very clearly likely to work. Most, if not all, of the companies that have failed for reasons that had nothing to do with their science and tech with their science and engineering team. It had to do with investors who decided they wanted to go in a different direction, or just all the gazillions of reasons that companies fail. It's really hard. And if you're trying to be 3 different companies in one, that's going to be really hard. There are now many, many cultivated meat companies that are just focused on media, just focused on infrastructure, just focused on bioreactor design, the range of issues. There are very few that have the sort of we are going to service the entire industry mentality on the plant-based meat side. So those are a couple of examples of why plant-based meat, despite probably being an easier challenge to solve, again, if you have a fraction of the number of people focused on solving it, and like all of them or close are in the private sector, I'm a fan of the private sector. I think the private sector is a big part of how we show governments that this is actually a viable industry that they should support. But it's also true that every company is solving the exact same challenges in a silo. Whereas once governments start solving the challenges, that's for the entire industry. And sort of all boats can rise. So, and then your question about GFI. Yeah, when we started, we had a complete misunderstanding of what the challenge was on the plant-based side. We basically thought, look at how good plant-based milk is doing. Let's just do that for meat.
Yeah.
Now that Ethan and Pat, the founders of Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, now that they've shown us the way, all we need is a lot more companies doing that, which was just radically wrong. We didn't understand the degree to which this was a science challenge and not a culinary challenge. And then on the cultivated meat side, like everybody else, we thought it was nowhere near ready for commercialization. It was really Uma Valetti who convinced us we should rethink. Well, he convinced me that we should look at it. And then the first 2 of the first 6 people we hired at GFI in June of 2016 were scientists. And one of them was charged with mapping out the plant-based meat techno-economic readiness sort of path to price and taste parity. And then Liz Specht was hired to do that on the cultivated meat side. And we very quickly learned that we were thinking about literally everything completely wrong.
Yeah, always good to find out, at least early in the game. I think that from the public side, part of the problem with cultivated meat and how it always feels so disappointing, and I understand this is just a feature of raising money, is that you have to kind of tell your investors that, we're 2 years away. Because that's what investors want to hear. And we kept hearing that it was 2 years away. And that's been about 20 years now. We've been hearing it was 2 years away. So I think people have gotten the feeling that it's just not going to happen. But you're making the point that every one of those 2 years, progress was made. It's just that it was a long-term project.
Yeah, I guess 2 things. I can't speak for what anybody else said, but I will say I don't think it's been more than 10 years that anybody's been saying anything, because the first company was founded in 2016, so literally 10 years ago. So I don't think anybody was really making any statements. I don't know what I was saying before 2019. I should go back and look. But I did look at a TED Talk that I did at the beginning of 2019, another TEDx talk that I did even a little bit before that. And my messaging since at least the beginning of 2019 has been, this is going to be really, really hard and really, really expensive. My quote in an Ezra Klein article from 2021 was, if we rely on the tender mercies of the private sector, it's going to take a really long time and we're not going to have very many products. So GFI's focus, at least for the last 7 years, has been, this is a science and engineering challenge. It's not going to solve itself. And the private sector is going to need a lot of help.
Yeah, and certainly it was not GFI who I recall saying that. It probably wasn't 20 years. It was probably 10. I admit it. All right, fermented. What's the story? I thought fermented foods were like the whole thing, and you hardly even mention them.
I think in the introduction I say whenever I have been saying plant-based meat and cultivated meat almost from the beginning, and maybe from the beginning, and that's because when I say fermentation, people get this idea of meat that's been sitting on the counter for 10 days, people just even corn, QUORN.
Right.
I've been on panels with them, and they are talking about how they are a plant-based meat company. Obviously, they're not. They're a biomass fermentation company. They're doing mycoprotein, but most people don't know that. So, Yeah, I mean, there's not photosynthesis with fermentation. They don't make their own food. They actually have to be, you have to feed the mycoprotein. But from the vantage of the consumer, mycoprotein, fungi, is really, basically the same as plant-based meat. So at the beginning of the book, I say I'm going to talk about plant-based meat, but realize that I also mean mycoprotein, things like corn and Better Meat Company and a bunch of other companies. And then the other form of fermentation that's very, very clearly in the sort of alternative meats scope is precision fermentation. And in fact, the solein, which you talked about earlier, making protein from air, that's using precision fermentation. And precision fermentation for plant-based and cultivated meat. For plant-based meat, it's really an ingredient, a flavoring agent. So like the Impossible Burger has a synthetic heme, which they do using precision fermentation. And probably a lot of ingredients in the media that feeds the cultivated meat, some of the growth factors and other things that are really expensive can probably be produced a lot less expensively using precision fermentation. And I think I have like 3 sentences in the book that just say, go to gfi.org if you want more analysis than you can possibly imagine of the scientific challenges and scientific reality for those 2 technologies. But this book is like, much more for people who are not scientists. There's a lot of science in it. And I'm going to go ahead and do a shameless plug. Nature Magazine, one of the 5 best science picks, they said. And then Publishers Weekly, one of the 10 best new releases in science for the spring, which made me so happy.
Excellent.
I wrote a science book, Mariann.
I'm not a scientist, but I play one in my book.
Exactly. Yeah. No, exactly. Not something I expected.
All right. So we're kind of running low on time, and I have about a million more questions, but maybe I'll save some of them for bonus. But is there anything we didn't cover that you really want to emphasize to people other than everybody loved your book?
That's what I want to emphasize. There's no plan B. That's the thing that I thought might be controversial on this podcast, is that since 1961, every single year, meat and poultry hits a new global record for all of time. And that's as long as anybody's been measuring. I'm sure it goes back way farther than that. Absent a recession or a slowing of population growth, per capita meat consumption goes up every year and population goes up every year. So meat consumption just keeps going up. The only 2 things, and this is one where I'm going to challenge listeners to actually think about this. The only 2 things that anybody is doing to try to change that massive upward trajectory is 1, convince people to eat less meat, and 2, make plant-based meat and cultivated meat. That is literally it. All of the efforts to, convince people to eat beans or, all of those other things, they're great. We should do those things. I mean, that's why I'm here. That's why you're here, Mariann. That's why all the people who founded the companies have founded the companies. But we have actually been doing that stuff pretty well.
Yeah,
which I talk about in
we're
chapter 5.
all aware of that.
Yeah. And meat consumption just keeps going up. So this is literally the only way that gets solved. In chapter 11 of the book, I do what I think is a pretty deep dive into scientific optimism for the possibility of plant-based and cultivated meat at taste and price parity, but also point out that it's going to be hard. And then the conclusion is really, here are ways that you can help. I don't think there is a better way to address industrial animal farming than figuring out how you can plug in on this. So that's sort of the plea, clarion call, whatever.
I mean, it's interesting that you thought that would be like the focus for this audience. And, it probably is for a lot of people. I tend to, but, I think most of, we think of ourselves as an animal rights podcast, not as a vegan podcast. And there's a kind of difference. I really want everybody to eat really delicious, healthy food. But a lot of people who listen to this are, we have a very smart audience. And, if you've been trying something for a while and it's not happening, you try something else. And I think that's how I see it. I don't really, if people want to eat, and I mean, obviously this food is better for people and than eating meat. It's not unhealthy. It's not what I would make everybody do if they would just put me in charge, Bruce, if they would only put me in charge, but they're not going to. So, yeah, I'm not sure you were right about this audience.
I
But,
clearly wasn't.
there are probably some people, and I mean, I'm one of them who I wish it wasn't this way, because it's so much easier than you could, live out the rest of your life in the Bahamas doing nothing. Things would be so much simpler, but it isn't. So, yeah. And you also, I mean, you call on people at the end of the book to be part of this, and you suggest that the transition is kind of up to the reader.
Yep.
And to some extent, you're talking about people who are starting out in their careers, people who have a science bent, sort of have academic credentials. And I'm sure there are people listening who fit into that, so that's fine. But what about just, people like me, just an animal activist who's not in that position? How can we speed up this transition?
I mean, I think there are a variety of ways, and I do try to talk about that too. I think in the sort of everybody else section of the conclusion. But I think the easiest
Yes, you
thing,
do. Yeah, yes, I didn't mean to say that you had left that out. Yeah.
the number one thing is getting politically active, especially if you have a Republican senator or a Republican member of Congress. The opportunity there's an organization called Food Solutions Action, which is very bipartisan. I'm on the board of Food Solutions Action, and members of Congress care a lot about their constituents who take the time to learn an issue and meet with them. It's valuable for Democrats to know that you're a constituent who cares about this and can speak about it articulately. It's even more valuable for Republicans. And we are getting a lot of Republicans to be enthusiastic about this, focusing on the food security, innovation, consumer choice, beat China, kinds of arguments, but actually having some constituent faces who they know and can cite when they're in conversations. Like, that's the favorite thing for members of Congress, is to talk about the conversation they had with their constituent about this thing and what they said. It's a really good sort of rhetorical technique. And it also is true. They actually do care. So I say that's probably the number one thing.
Well, I mean, that is something that everybody can do. And everybody is always saying it really does matter. I guess it's just, politicians. We don't understand them, but we have to accept that this is what they're like. And going in person and telling them what you think makes a difference.
It does.
Really, really. I have so many more questions, but this was really great, Bruce. I learned a lot from reading the book, and I learned even more from listening to you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mariann. I'm incredibly delighted to be a podcast and really, really enjoy it. I'm grateful to you.
And to everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube. And catch our next episode of Rising Anxieties on Tuesday. And we'll see you soon.